Hi, welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and video show which brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, and experience from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world who want to share their knowledge and experience. And today, I'm delighted to have a conversation with Freda Liu. Freda, welcome to the program.
Hi, Fritz. Good to see you again, although virtually.
Yes, we'll cover that in the interview where we met. Give the audience a little bit of your background. You yourself are a global speaker, author, broadcast journalist, moderator, and trainer. You've written a number of books, and you have done, well, close over 10,000 interviews to date with, well, thought leaders like well-known people, Nobel Peace Prize winners like Yunus, prime ministers of Finland, Stephen Coe, Jack Welch, and even the Prince Andrew and the founder of WikiLeaks, Julian
Right.
Assange. So a big variety of people you've been able to ask questions. You live in Malaysia, and actually for all that work, you also got a lot of recognition with a number of great awards, like the Asian Rice Bowl Awards for a Malaysian startup journalist of the year. And you also are a mentor in the Cherry Blair Foundation for Women. A lot to talk about.
Yes.
Last thing, educated in business and marketing, and later innovation design thinking and sustainable studies. Wow. That is a great, exceptional background to begin with. As mentioned, almost 10,000 interviews. Normally, you are on the other side of the table.
Yes.
How does it feel to be interviewed
To be
yourself?
uh okay. When you were doing the introductions and I was listening to myself, I said, well, I have been busy, but I've been doing this for a long time. But being on the other side, it's interesting. And sometimes you realize that when you're the one asking the questions, it's interesting when it's posed back to you. And so you
Yeah.
appreciate what it's like to be on the other side
Yes.
when you're doing the questioning. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. That's good to know because that's also why I'm a little bit concerned of interviewing with such a big, huge background. But I was wondering, what was your journey from being a award-winning journalist in Malaysia? Um, how did it start? Because
Okay. Okay.
it's not in
Because
education, so somewhere you took a decision. This is what I want to do.
Okay, so the decision was like this. So I did my business degree in marketing and I wanted to work in PR, which I did. And I worked for an international company called Edelman for about 4 or 5 years. And I was in IBM
Yeah.
for over 10 years doing PR. But I was also a part-time news reader and a news presenter on radio and TV. And that was so it's part time, and I never wanted to do it full time. I think if I had wanted to do full time, I probably would have studied that course. And like,
Yeah.
in terms of journalism, the bigger options within Asia would be in Hong Kong or
Mhm.
Singapore, right? And I continue to stay in Malaysia. But when the radio station that I used to work for started 15 years ago, it was so intriguing. It was a combination of having worked in corporate, businessy kind of thing, and also um, my experience in broadcast, and it was something that I could marry. It was a 30% pay cut, but I just felt so driven to join this because I thought it was something new, and maybe I was getting bored of the job.
Okay.
And and I think the last 15 years has been really exciting. When I joined, it was the global financial crisis. It was, but at the same time, there was the start of the startup scene, and people were excited about businesses. So it was a very interesting time to be in, and so I just felt that that was the decision. And you've got, I think you reached a certain point in life as well. You talk about these things that I've done. I've been around for a while, so you reach that point in your life where does it you finding it, you need more meaning, right?
Mhm.
And I think a core value for me is learning. And so when I interview someone, I'm learning, right? I'm just something new every day, something new to be learned every day. And I think that was the reason I got in that direction.
Yeah, to be honest, I recognize that because you made so many interesting people along the way, and I just
Mhm.
named a couple of the people you've been able to talk
Right.
to. And
Yeah.
how does that work? You just cannot pick up the phone and say, "Hey, Simon, can I have a call?" or Prince Andrew. So
Okay.
what's the process which allows you to meet people like that?
Okay, so some of them are done if physically, if they happen to be in town and an opportunity comes about, because so right now you don't really talk about Prince Andrew because it's sort of taboo, but at that
Yes.
time
Yeah.
he was here for the Picture Palace, which was a program for businesses, a global program for businesses, and so he was a spokesperson, so I got to meet him. Simon Sinek was over the phone. I think it starts with the first,
Yeah.
right? You get one name, one
Yeah.
good name, and that one good name will then be say, can I interview you? Because here's a link
Yes.
to other people I've interviewed,
Yeah.
right? And so there's an expression here where you leverage on the fact that you've done others,
Yeah.
and hopefully that will spill over. But there were some other things as well. For example, with the former Finnish Prime Minister Alex Stubb. It was because I do a lot of these things, and there was an event, and he was one of the speakers, and so I was moderating the event, and I got to speak to him there. So
Okay. Well,
yeah,
that's actually how we met as well in Borneo, because
right, right,
then the
okay,
tables again were turned because I was a keynote in Borneo at a conference where you were the moderator.
yeah,
And I do recognize what you're saying because I did take the opportunity. Hey, I see something I like. I want to have a discussion with you.
right.
So
It must
yeah,
have been over the dinner, over the dinner in Borneo, and the dance and the loud noise. I'm amazed you managed to hear anything.
yeah, it was very much an experience.
Right.
Now I was wondering, how do you prepare for interviews? Do you want to know everything up front, or do you want to leave a little bit of flexibility and I'd say unknown territory in to allow
Okay.
for creativity?
Okay. Okay. So in interviewing someone, you look out for you refer to past interviews they've done, right?
Yeah.
And so sometimes these things they would have answered a million and one times, I mean, because they've probably done it a million and one times. So I try to sort of set the stage and mention all these things up front, and then find a deeper hook to something, right? And obviously sometimes in their answers it leads to other things as well. So and you have a particular direction you want to lead it, right? You move it in that direction, but you do give room for the person to just express themselves, to
Yeah.
speak themselves, to say what they want to say, and then probably find something new out of that, right? Something that they've been passionate about, that they never had an opportunity to ask, right? Like I was just talking to a friend of mine who plays the harpsichord. He says every time I get interviewed, he says, so it's like, how do you get into music? I know it's like, okay, everybody knows that, right? So how do you take it deeper, right?
Yeah.
In that sense. Yeah. Mm.
Okay. Couple of questions to explore from my own experience. I once interviewed somebody, sorry, very high up in the American government.
Right.
So he came to the Netherlands, to Amsterdam, and we sit down for an interview. And I thought we did a good job because all the questions he asked, he made the impression he was thinking about that,
Right.
gave great answers. So, hey, we love your answers. And then a day later, there was like a more open, formal press conference for a whole group of people. And
Mm.
then all of a sudden, I realized I was just being fed sound bites because I was hearing exactly the same words as you're hearing in the interview.
Okay.
So, do you recognize that?
Okay.
And I found it extremely annoying because then I realized probably I wasn't able to ask an original question, and it was all well prepared up front. And okay, we'll give you some tidbits. That's how it felt.
Okay. Okay. This is America we're talking about.
Yes.
And this is who probably invented PR.
Yeah.
Uh, they have probably got a fact sheet of things that they have
Mm.
prepared for all the things that so I
Yeah.
think in this case, right, in this case of the American person that you have, they've already got these answers, so it's like, okay, just stick to the sound bites. And I don't think it's a reflection of you not being able to get deeper, but it's just like, okay, they're probably going to ask this, they're going to probably ask this, and he's probably been briefed
Yeah.
a million and one times on what to say. So I think that's sort of kind of different. In the case of an American politician, I mean, you
Yeah.
said it right, so, so uh, for fear of causing any rebuttal, right? And I'm just saying that I think that that's just the case being in America, someone in politics in America.
That's true. Yeah. Now,
Mm.
now, couple of last questions on interviews before we're going to move on to the different topic. Your preference, do you just want to nudge people to tell their own story, or are you prepared for the third degree? So there's a balance how you can shape
Yes,
the interview.
yes. So, okay. My style, and I think you have to stay true to your style, is not I'm not really a third degree kind of person, or the third degree can come into a, and I know the Dutch are known to be
Yeah,
very direct,
yeah.
right? Okay, so that's like, let's just cut to the chase. I think that's where the a little bit of Asianness comes in, or maybe just my style, where I do want to get to that question, but I probably get it with a third question. And the reason behind that is I want to warm you up first, and that you feel like you're talking to a
Yeah.
friend.
Yes.
And that's when, the analogy of how I always say this, the analogy of throwing sand to a clam, right? So don't. So then they will slowly open their mouths and tell you their life story. I mean, and this is a little bit of other studies, right? Where typically when I had guests coming in, I ask them to come in half an hour earlier. Why do I ask them to come in half an hour earlier? They're relaxed. They're there half an hour. They're not caught in traffic. They're not stressed. And I actually spend time talking to them a little bit about the questions, but like, how's your day? Your children, we just talk about other things. By the time they come to the studio, they feel like they're talking to a friend. And when they're talking to a friend, I'm able to get the story that I want, right? And the kind of interviews that I do are not really hard talk style, right? It's more fact finding. This new concept, well, not new concept, it's called solutions journalism, right? Where we're not just out to get someone. That sells, it's clickbaitish, it sells news. But
Mhm.
I think, like, for example, I cover a lot of businesses, and people want to understand how the business is run, so that when other people listen, they can learn something from them. So if you get them on a defensive, they're not saying anything. uh I mean, it's great, it's information for a while, you get excited for a while, but no one's learning anything. So my objective when I do an interview is that in my conversation with this person, did someone out there learn something from this conversation? But that's just me.
Good.
Yeah.
Again, I recognize that. I think it's actually what we're doing, try to do right now with the brand called You, just
Mm,
showcase what a lot. There's so many great people
yeah.
out there. Now,
Right.
I want to move on to also the fact that you are the author of a number of books. And upfront, how personal are these books? And to what extent is there a link between all the interviews you've done and what you're putting in the books?
Okay. All right. Okay. So I've written 7 books, right? The first book I wrote was called PR Yourself. And I'll give is I'm not gonna go too deep to that. The first book I wrote, PR Yourself, was about 10 years ago. I just reflect 10 years ago. And at a time when I was interviewing a lot of people in Malaysia, I find that a lot of Asian businesses are not very good at storytelling, and they're not good at continuing the story, right? And something that we can learn from our Western counterparts. And that was the reason I wrote that book, because we do have great stories and we just don't know how to tell the story better. And that was the reason for the first book. And after doing interviews for about 5 years, I was like, or I'll meet someone that I interviewed ages ago and they tell me this has happened, this has happened, this has happened. I said, how do I not know about this? How are you not sharing that wonderful story? So that was the first book. The other books that I kind of relevant, I'm trying to, and I'll talk about the later books. The other book that I collaborated with this guy who was also, we were friends, and he's a lawyer, but he's also got his own business, and that's me. And then we're like, I was about to venture into a business, and the logic of me doing things is as a woman and his viewpoint as a man. So we sort of wrote it in, like, when we look at this, how does a woman look at it and how does a man look at it? So that was a little bit of personal story. The latest book that I wrote was a couple of ladies getting together. 6 of us got together talking about what it means to be audacious. So
Yes.
we all wrote from personal life stories. I'm trying to connect it with work as well. Another book that I wrote was called Bursting Fixed Mindsets, and I interviewed women in business these are people that I've interviewed. And a lot of women, there is gender inequality when it comes to women in business. And we're only in Malaysia. In Malaysia, only 20% of businesses are owned by women. So I interviewed women who are earning revenues of in excess of $1 million, and not so much about the struggles, but how they thought differently to move that level. So that was, I want to come from a solutions journalism perspective, and that was so these are people I've met. I'm like, okay, how is it that you're able to think differently, and how is it some people don't, right? So that was it. The most personal one was written during the pandemic, 2020, when I said to myself, I will write 1,000 words a day before I get to watch Netflix. So that was, so over 40 days, I wrote 40,000 words. I sent this over to a publisher based in Singapore. They don't know who I am. And I said, would you be interested to publish this? And then, they don't know who I am. They said, yeah, they'll send me a chapter. And I was like, it was a personal challenge for me, because I think talking to people here, they might know who I am. So I wanted to go a little bit further to show that, it's based on my own writing. And that book talked about my life, the lessons I learned in the last few decades of my life, and what were the lessons I learned in each decade. And like a sort of like a memoir also for my son, which he never reads any of my books, but one day.
Okay. Well, maybe one day he will. Seth,
Yeah.
you made a couple of interesting statements I want to go back to.
Yeah.
First, started with the book. It's interesting you say when you said, okay, how I get access to people to interview. I actually refer to somebody I interviewed before. But when you send your book to Singapore, you do not put that in a context that, hey, you actually are a well-known journalist in Malaysia.
That was the book in 2020, because it was just like, okay, it was just more for myself, like, do I get published because people know me? And I'm sure that's a selling factor, right? And then, but at the same time, you just want to take yourself to a different level and say, okay, is this then based on my writing? Is there real content here? Because they don't know who I am. And so it's proof to myself that it is, they do want this, right? Purely on merit, and it's for self-satisfaction. But yeah, that was the most personal. I talk about everything in that book, everything from childbirth to, living in a few countries and what that means, how disruptive that was, especially as a teenager, how disruptive that was to my life. But look, of course, things always make sense in hindsight, but at that point, it felt like the end of the world, so.
Okay. I'm a little bit of a segue here. I'm going to get two ways I can.
Okay.
I want to come back to because that still triggers me in my mind. You mentioned that with 6 women, you wrote a book.
Yes.
And the stories were outrageous.
Yeah, being audacious.
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 Yeah,
yes.
Well, that could also be outrageous, I guess. But did you yourself determine it was audacious, or did also the world around you think, hey, this is actually quite audacious what you've done? So.
Okay. Okay. Again, maybe, and if I'm not answering your question properly, ask me again. So it was a case of us, 6 ladies from different backgrounds, initiated by one of the girls, but she was saying, okay, what does audacity mean to us, right? And the book was called How Dare They, right? How dare, and it was like the steps we took to be audacious, what it means to be audacious, right? And our different perspectives. So that was the context of how we were writing it, and we're just, and it's not a book meant for women, but I take it when 6 women write about it, it will probably relate more to women, and women have a problem being audacious. And audacious is not a bad word, right? But we always hear the audacity, but audacious is actually being brave. Audacious is actually doing something different, and to put a positive spin to being audacious, right? First, the original title of the book was being what was it? I can't remember. But I said, oh, it's been used, is too common. I think it was something about attitude or whatever. I can't remember. I said it's too boring, right? We got to be a little bit more audacious.
Okay. It explains that by just trying to thanks for that explanation, but it's also trying to determine if that book also was meant to inspire other people,
Yes.
women. Oh, come on, take it up a step. You can actually
Yes.
do this.
Yes. 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 And that, I think like the different women with their different backgrounds, different, the different racial groups
Yeah.
within Malaysia. So that was featured. So you can try to connect with as many people's Malaysia in Malaysia. Like I'm of Chinese heritage, but I'm from East Malaysia. So, you want to showcase the broad range of women, the broad range of people that we have here. And it doesn't matter where we come from or what heritage that we come from. We can all be audacious in our own ways. So that was the purpose of the book. Yeah.
If you look back at your life so far, are there any significant milestones which determined your life and your career?
Okay. Ooh, okay. Milestones, good and bad milestones. I think for me was actually my divorce, right? My divorce now would be okay, about over 10 years ago. And I think that was a moment where I was obviously feeling very down and all that, but also the time I appreciated life a bit more. I don't know, sometimes it takes that you learn how to not take things for granted, and then I do this thing right now, of course, is end the year, beginning of the year, where I go through the wheel of life, right? And where do I need to improve in the eight aspects of my life, be it finance, be it my fitness, be it my family and friends, right? And relationships. And this is where you also look back, okay, have I invested enough into relationships? And because I didn't, right, that was probably also a reason for the breakdown in that marriage, right? So
Mm.
this is, I think, that was a milestone for me. And in that way as well, then of course I look at what can I do to be better in my career? What can I do? So I don't want to be just, you can have your wonderful career and not have your family, right? So what is the meaning of life? And I think that was probably a trigger for me to do bigger and better things. I remember that moment in my life. I prayed and I said, God, I want to be a better person, not a bitter person. And I didn't know what better meant. But it just take me on this journey where I'll be a better person. I didn't want any bitterness about anything to set in. And so just let me be a better person. So that my formula now is like, okay, what do I need to improve in all these little aspects of my life? Because we're multifaceted people, right? Business is just one aspect. Your work is just one aspect of your life. You've got to have a full life as much as possible.
Yeah. No, good. You're a person, not a function.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And in all those years you've been around, what have you found the most inspiring? Or where do you draw your inspiration from?
Oh, okay. And like in all the years I've been around,
Well,
in
you
all the years, I think,
you have
okay,
a rich history of so many people
yes,
you've been
yes,
talking to.
yes,
So
yes. Where do I find my inspiration? My inspiration is I did this thing, the Gallup poll,
yeah,
the
yeah.
Strengths Finder, and I know one of the things that really drives me is learning. Right. And and every day is something new. Every day is what did I learn today? Right. And I think that's my inspiration. I don't know what I don't know. And and that just sort of like, something you have a conversation with somebody and they're like, what? I don't know what I don't know. Keeps me humble, keeps me open, keeps me alert, and just be on, like, there's just, when you think you know everything, that's a problem. So I don't know what I don't know is probably what drives me, so that I can get to the point where I know what I don't know, to the point I know, right? So every day there's always something I don't know that I don't know. And then the learning process begins. So that inspires me.
Okay. And in following up on that, does success for you mean being able to keep on learning, or do you also have another way of defining if you're happy or successful or not?
Um, yes, okay. So I imagine, so when people said, I said, I think I'll continue to be working for the rest of my life, and working not in that money driven sense, but that I would like to be purposeful, right? And something that continues to use my brain and whatever. And as you move on right now, it's about the next generation, right? How can you contribute and help towards the next generation? Of course, all the things matter. Do I have enough money? That's important. I've got goals that I still want to achieve. Like, do I want to be known on a global stage? These things still drive me, right? But I think like underlying all that, I've got to be very clear. Who is Freda, right?
Mhm.
Who is Freda without all these things, all these attachments that people like to label you in. And sometimes I just do things completely different so that you can't put a label on me, right? And that's for me, really. That's for me, really. That what's to stop me from moving in another direction? What's to stop me from trying something new? So that's what keeps me going, I guess.
Hmm.
Mm.
Okay, you've made it quite difficult for me to ask one of the last couple of questions I want to share with you, Frida, and that is, how do you want the world to remember you?
Okay. All
A
right.
lot of people are quite clear. That's what I am, and if people remember me like that, that's great. But
Uh,
basically, what you're saying is, please don't put me in a box.
Yeah.
Label me.
Yeah. Okay. I know. Don't put me in a box. Okay, how do I want to be remembered? That she was impactful, that she made a difference in people's lives, the causes that I believe in. And I think most importantly, my relationship with my son, right? If
Mhm.
everybody can say wonderful things about you and the person closest to you said, she was a horrible mother, I think, then I don't know if that's the definition of success. So right now, he's 21. I try to have I make a point to communicate with him as much as possible. The conversations are different. He's not a 14-year-old anymore. So that kind of relationship, I think that's the most important thing. I want to teach him to be independent at the same time. So then also the purpose, right? Things that drive me, education for people who haven't had an equal opportunity with education. Because if anything, the only thing that has helped me in my life was the fact that I had an education, and that was it, right? And then everything after that was something that I worked for, but that helped level my playing field. But there's so many people who don't even have that. So causes I believe in, World Vision, right here in Malaysia, there's a thing called Dignity for Children, and it's about and it's beyond Malaysia, right? Dignity for Children works for children in Malaysia. World Vision is how I try to support kids around the world, and I try to support girls
Mhm.
getting an education around the world. So these are things, right? And making peace with my maker, knowing that everything that he has given me that I have utilized and hopefully, use more than everything that he has given me. I think that's important. Yeah. Otherwise, we're all just, we're not contributing by emitting carbon dioxide.
Hey, again, this is a great segue to what my last question for you, and that is, um, yeah, what would your advice be to young people? And given the fact also that you are a mentor of the Cherry Blair Foundation and
Yeah,
also an adjunct professor, so you actually are already in a formal role where you coach people.
right. I always tell people, why do you want to get an education, right? Get some basic skills, right? Get some basic skills sorted is the and I'm saying this right, is a degree really that important, right? And it's because you don't stop learning. I think if anything, don't stop learning just because you've finished, a formal education.
Yeah.
That's important. I talked to my son as well. I said to him, what you study right now, maybe something that you don't want to do after this, and it's okay. While you're at university, make friends, have build connections, live the wonderful university life, and just enjoy the experience. But at the same time, know that the world's going to be changing, and always to be agile, and always to be quick to adapt, right? And I just worry about the new generation of what we call the strawberry generation, right? And
Okay.
I've sent him over to,
By the way,
no, I've
could
sent.
you that might be an Asian term. Could you explain what you mean by
Oh,
this?
the straw. Okay, oh, okay. The strawberry generation also depends, right? If you had a little bit of privilege, right? You've had and my son has had his privilege. where, a little bit, you just get crushed so easily, right? The strawberry just, so I don't want it, you build that resilience. Know that and I'm going to encourage him to work elsewhere so that what it's like to be independent, right? And I think that will be my greatest gift to him, that he's independent and that he's happy. And even though whatever was happening around the world with AI and all that, of course, keep abreast of all these things, but that we all have a place in this world, right? And once you found that thing that makes you happy, and be then contribute in that space, right? And I believe that once you're happy and you found your thing, you are there for a purpose, and don't, and I could go on, right? Don't be driven by money, right? It don't be driven, because that will make you lose direction. It's important to have your bills paid and all that, but I feel that if you're doing something that was meant for you to do, the money will come. Yeah.
That's great advice to end with, Freda.
Mm.
I want to thank you so much for sharing your insights, experience for the brand called You. And I do hope we're going to meet again in Borneo, because the weather is going to be much better there. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.